All of you talk frequently about where you rank certain teams and will regularly discuss ranking disparities between the polls. Could you all explain whether you think these rankings ought to be resume based, for example, a ranking of which teams have the best performance to date, or projection based, for example, a ranking of which teams you expect to have the best performance from here on out? I often see the debate around postseason participation framed as finding the four best versus finding the four most deserving. And I think that much of the controversy around rankings comes down to disagreements between fans over what these polls actually represent. It would be great to hear you all talk about your preferences, how you personally go about ranking when asked to do so. Thanks for all your hard work. Keep it up. Go Ducks.
Depends what I'm trying to accomplish.
Good answer.
It's like if a power rating or a predictive rating, I don't think can be the rankings that you use during a regular college football season, or else there truly is no point to playing the season. Because if your power ratings are accurate, yeah, you're changing them as the season goes along, but they're not changing that much. Like you might knock a team down a spot or two, but I would tell you right now, in most Vegas power ratings, Penn State's still a top 15 team. Is Penn State deserve to be ranked in the top 15 right now? No. So I think that if the results of games are going to matter, your ranking cannot strictly be based predictive. I think it needs, ideally, you need to find a blend, but that's, again, so it depends. Like there are power ratings for gambling purposes. I have my separate ratings that I do, which are just completely reactive, which I use for our CBS Sports 130 ballot in my bottom 25. And then there are the rankings I submit for the Super 16 poll, which are really just my opinion of which team I think is better / most deserving / whatever the hell I feel like using at the time.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question because, like Tom just did, there are a lot of ways you can take this, right? Resume rankings, if you want to use them to project forward, are probably going to get you killed, right? They're not that accurate. I never fully remove priors from prior seasons. Like I still, in week 15, will bake in Alabama's previous 5-year history because it makes rankings more accurate. That's proven. It's still more predictive than not. But I do think for the health of the sport, some of the things that happened last night, and I can't be on the Tuesday night show, but some of the things that happened last night I don't think are great if we're going to have, let's use the committee, for instance. If the committee is going to pick the 4 best teams, clearly, like the pick of Alabama matches up with what they've done in the past. Like Bama has a lot of really dominant wins over teams that the committee feels is top 25, like Ole Miss, Mississippi State, etc. And it has a close loss to another team that the committee feels is top 25. And Miami beating Pitt over the weekend probably didn't hurt either. However, I don't know that always picking the 4 best teams is actually the best thing for this sport. I think if we're going to crown a champion of a given year, we need to basically crown the most deserving champion of that year. And I think we do need to punish losses somewhat, and we can certainly reward good wins. But if we're always picking the very best teams, more often than not, it's going to be those teams that were very dominant in most of their games and had one slip up. Like a lot of those teams that Danny played on at Florida State would be where Bama is right now. You know, they were clearly better than some of those teams that had a 0 in the loss column. So if we want to be more accurate, you go power ratings. Although I will argue, I think that the treatment they gave Cincinnati last night is not consistent with the treatment they gave Alabama. Like that's the one problem I have. Like, okay, you guys want to go power ratings this early and you want to go, best wins and kind of ignore the losses. All right. I don't know if Cincinnati 6 there makes a ton of sense, but I think if we want to keep the sport more interesting, we either need to go a little bit more, resume as opposed to power rating for the committee, or expand it or contract it. But I think the combination of 4 and power ratings is giving too much leeway for teams to drop games and still go win it all and just be the best team by the end of the season, while not. I think our Cover 3 fans realize, like most of these teams, Baylor gets hot and goes 12-0. They're not actually going to win the national title. But fans want to be lied to a little bit. Everybody wants to lie to themselves to believe their team has a shot to make it. And I think we need to keep that dream alive at least until you get to the dance, and then let Cinderella get her slipper smashed, or however that. Gosh, I probably should watch that movie. I'm going to use that reference, but you guys see what I'm saying? Like, we need to keep the dream alive. And the current combination that bothers me is the combination of picking the quote unquote 4 best teams as opposed to the 4 most deserving. And I think if you went with the 12 best teams, you would scoop up a lot of the most deserving, or even the 8 would scoop up a lot of the quote most deserving. The combination of 4 plus power rating, which is kind of what they're doing. Man, I know they basically use like game control, top 25 wins.
They've got FPI on that sheet. That's a power rating.
Yeah, that's true. But an FPI certainly informs the strength of record metric, which closely tracks what they do. Not perfectly. I just don't like the combo of 4 plus power ratings. I think it's kind of a dream killer.
I hate it all. It's all confusing. It's all like the question is a great question, but if you ask analysts around the country who chime in on this on major networks, they all have different answers of what they should value. And then, you know what else they'll throw in there as well? The eye test, and you have some of these more ambiguous reasons for putting teams there. I default to a fault to resume. I think winning matters, so I give undefeated teams a lot of credit for doing that, even if their schedule hasn't been that great. Because you know what? It usually comes out in the wash at the end. Like, I don't think Wake Forest is going to run the table. So they'll lose, and guess what? I'll be wrong. But I don't care if I'm wrong, because I think you should have Wake Forest higher than most because they've run the table. And I get that it's a strong schedule, but they've won. And when the committee sits last night and Gary Barta says about Cincinnati, and he points out, their wins against 2-6 teams and 1-5 teams and how they didn't dominate against Tulane or Navy. Well, apparently struggling against those teams is worse than losing to Stanford, which is what Oregon did. And Oregon also, by the way, struggled against Cal, and they were losing against Fresno State late in the game. Again, I get Fresno State's a good team, but it just becomes very confusing. And I just get to this point of exasperation. Like, what are we doing? It makes zero sense. And yet we keep going through it. And it's Bill Hancock gets up there and says, we have a contract in place. I think we're going to get to that place where we find a sweet spot and we expand and we can kind of end some of this charade. But like, could you imagine? I was just looking at the stats from last year of the NFL playoffs. Like, according to, if you did power ratings last year, Green Bay was probably one of the better teams in the country in the NFL. And yet Tampa Bay went there, beat them. Could you imagine if you threw them all back in there and said, well, if they played again, resumes and all this stuff. Well, man, did you see Tampa Bay? They looked awful in that 138-3 loss. It makes no sense that we do this. And yet I guess it's the beautiful flaw of college football, which all this is supposed to be great. Like, it's good for us. We get to debate it. It's good for ESPN. They create a show around it and there's a lot of discussion and who's in. I guess it's fun, but I worry, much like Bud, because I feel more of it. And maybe it's just because of the evolution of social media. People have voices that matter. But I hear more and more fans being like, it's just going to be Bama and it's just going to be Ohio State. So who cares? I guess we'll just tune in and watch those. And I think it's damaging to the game.
And I think that's part of the reason why there will be some hesitancy with expansion to have automatic qualifiers, because as stupid as it is, the debate
is awesome.
It drives a lot of the interest.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we've learned a lot these last few years in this country, and it turns out that getting people angry is how you get their attention.
Well, even for I have believed that college football is a talking sport. We spend 12 months talking about a regular season that only has 12 games. And if we left everything up to analytics and made things easy to understand, then the conversations wouldn't go on for 12 months. And I think that the debates that rage go all the way back to shared national championships from the poll era. Who is your national champion from the 2004 season? Who is your national championship from 1990? I think that is the built-in, as you pointed out, Danny, I think that's the built-in beautiful flaw. And I think that as expanding the playoff might help with fans not checking out, and it might help with hope trafficking in trying to get more, literally more eyeballs involved and thinking they can win a national championship. The idea that we're going to be arguing best versus most deserving is going to continue as long as we are playing this sport, just because we have so few data points and so many variables built into the structure of a 12-month calendar of college football.
Which is why I loved the 12-team proposal that was put forth, because it had a little bit of both. It had 6, highest ranking, conference champions who get that automatic berth. And then there's some debate about the rest. So you kind of get a combination of, all right, you can win your way in, but you can also impress with the eye test, which I think it keeps the debate going on the back end. It keeps the debate going on who should be 1 and 2, right? Because they were going to rank the top 6 and the top 2 seeds get buys. So there's still a lot of conversation and there's still a lot of controversy, but you don't screw over a lot of teams. That's what bothers me the most. Like, I felt really bad for UCF players in 2017. I feel bad for players at Cincinnati. Luke Fickell will be fine, right? He can get a raise. He can go somewhere else. He's already getting a boatload of money. There's a lot of players who play at Cincinnati who will never play in the NFL, don't transfer, but they believed. However, maybe they should have been listening to Cover 3 because they could have listened to Tom and maybe been dealt a dose of reality. But I do think they believed, man, we have Indiana, Notre Dame on the road. If we beat them, we went out, we can make it. We can be this team, and they don't have a chance. Like, that's the part in all of this that really bothers me.
I do think a blend is my personal approach, and I don't look at deserving until we get a bigger sample size. Like, I need to get 4 to 5 games in, maybe even all the way to the midseason, before I feel like resume's doing much more other than splitting ties between teams that I think are better, which is a combination of eye test and power rating. So early in the season, I'm going to be favoring teams that I think who would win tomorrow. And later in the season, when I'm filling out ballots, it is much more about stacking up all of the wins and losses on a sheet of paper and then using that as a primary sorting tool. It's just tough because the different opponents and the different schedules, is your schedule backloaded? Is it front loaded? I think that can be a little deceiving and lead to some pretty big swings throughout your own ballot at the beginning of the season.
Also, last thing on this, 2 things. Number one, if you like Cover 3 and you want to advertise on Cover 3, maybe you have a national or regional audience, we now have an email you can hit up show ads at 247sports.com. That's show ads at 247sports.com. And who better to advertise with us than maybe somebody who runs marketing for a company who actually listens to us. So yeah, that's how you get in contact. If you're interested, we're going to do millions of downloads this football season and already have. So pretty excited about that. If we had, I feel like you cannot unring the bell. I heard Tom on an episode the other day say like we should contract or expand. And I don't think you can unring the bell and contract. I don't think contraction would be the worst thing, but like it's definitely not going to happen now. I wonder if we had this type of 14 playoff system for a long time, even stretching back into the 80s, is college football as popular now as it is? I think this current format actually could have driven some interest away if we had this back in like the 80s and 90s because of some of the interesting results that we had that maybe gave people the false but lasting belief that their teams really had a shot.
I mean, would that be like the Georgia Tech and Colorado winning
Georgia
the national
Tech, Colorado? Yeah, I mean BYU.
Well, why is the NFL so popular if they've always had a definitive playoff without any debate whatsoever? I think it's a lot of it's gambling related in fantasy football, which are part of the lexicon now in college football too, and always have been just the same.
But every team, okay, the difference is this, Danny. Every team in the NFL has a reasonable basis for belief that their team could be good and actually win a title soon. Even if you're like a damn Jets fan and they don't ever win anything. Like under the structure of the sport with the salary cap and the roster limits and the draft, which rewards the worst teams, gets the first pick, you kind of have that continuing belief. It's not a belief that should be false. If you're terrible forever, that's really just your own fault. It's not a resources issue for the most part. In college, about 118 of the 130 teams should not have a true belief that they can win it all. For the good of the sport, we need that number to be more about like 100 of the 130 don't think so. I need those fans of like Baylor and TCU and Washington and Wisconsin and all those teams that are never going to win another title to actually think that they could if they had that special year. And I don't like that the format right now kind of steps on them a little bit. Like we need that belief to stay alive.
But
That
that's my question though. Why
The
did all
NFL,
this
everybody has
debate-
equal resources, and they earn their way into the playoff via divisional format.
No, I know,
with
but, like,
automatic bids. And
what we've said on here is that the controversy has made the sport popular. Like that's my question: is why is the NFL so popular? It's never had controversy. Like
every
it's been
game is close
straightforward.
deep into the fourth quarter.
Right.
Right. Like,
So
like
it's a
all
parity.
these games remain interesting. Yeah.